Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming out this afternoon. Good to see a lot of familiar, friendly faces and some new ones as well. I'm John Crippen, Director of Hennepin History Museum. I'm here with Sue Hunter Weir, and we're excited to have a chat, and we'll make some time at the end for all of you to ask questions and have comments as well, because I'm sure you've got thoughts. So I'm going to sit. Whoa. Try to sit. So, Sue, thank you again for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Is the sound working in the back?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yay.
Well, we've just been thrilled to have this collaboration over the last months with Sue Hunter Weir and the Friends of the Pioneer Soldier Cemetery. The exhibit upstairs is really popular. It's bringing people in. It's always a good sign when people come to the front desk and say, "Where's the cemetery exhibit?" We know that we've gotten through and we're catching people what's interesting to them. So, Sue, you've been at this a long time. You don't need to say how long, but tell us how did you catch the Pioneer Soldiers Cemetery bug? Like what first pulled you in, and how did you first get going on it all?
Well, I like to think of myself as kind of a nice person, but the thing that really pulled me in is I had a kind of cranky fit. I live in the Phillips neighborhood. I've lived there for 50 years. And in the 1990s, I got a little sick and tired of us being referred to as crime-ridden and blighted. And so, kind of irked me. And many of you don't know this, but Phillips was actually the first neighborhood in the city of Minneapolis to have a website. And so we set up a history section, and I sort of moseyed over to the cemetery to see, I was looking for a person or two. Well, 22,000 people later, here I am, because they kind of glom onto you. If you haven't been upstairs and looked at the pictures, the photos, and read some of the stories, you'll see what I mean about that. So it really kind of took over my life in a good way, in a very good way, actually. And that's what the community building piece has meant to me. When I first started this, I thought of community as a geographic entity, that it is the Phillips neighborhood. That was the whole point initially. But it kind of got out of hand, shall we say. Very much out of hand. But it's been an absolute treat to do this. And I foresee doing it for as long as I can. It's really been quite an adventure. But that was really it. There were two stories in particular that sort of triggered it. One was a man named John Effort, who was a Latvian immigrant. And interestingly, he was a Marxist. And the thing that intrigued me is on his marker, where normally you'd have like a religious symbol, right? He's got Workers of the World Unite. And I went, whoa, there's a story. And he was just a really, really interesting man. He was also Jewish. Pioneers and Soldiers is a non-denominational cemetery, although typically people who are Orthodox or practicing in some way, like Catholic or Jewish, are more likely to be buried in a cemetery that has a religious affiliation, but ours does not. So he was one, and the other person whose photo is on the wall, and dear lady, I credit or blame her for this. If you look at the exhibit, there's a photograph of a woman named Anna Clark, and Anna committed suicide in the cemetery back in 1909, and they printed the text, or a partial version of her suicide note, in the newspaper. And from that point on, I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked about the stories and the kinds of people who were there. So if you haven't been upstairs, or if you've been upstairs and are willing to go again, take a look at the picture of Anna Clark and look at those eyes.
Those eyes are haunting, that's for sure.
Those eyes are haunting. And she looks very much like my goddaughter.
Well, when we were chatting about this a few days ago, you talked about 3 stages or 3 different kinds of engagement as we think about community. Whoa. And the first one was, you described it as recreating a community from the past.
Right.
So
right.
Talk about your process. How do you, the research you do, how you start to knit together, as you say, the residents of this cemetery and reclaim the community that they were once in and are in now, perhaps.
one of the things that we're working on now, it's kind of shaped what we're doing. We're very, very proud of the fact that Pioneers and Soldiers is only the second site in the state of Minnesota listed on the National Park Service Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. So it is the resting place of people who were formerly enslaved and ran towards freedom. And there are 4 people mentioned in our nomination. Like I said, we're only the second site in the state. The other is Pilgrim Baptist Church in St. Paul. And I worked on this with a woman who lives in Atlanta, Elyse Hill, who has become quite a good friend. That's one community right there.
Yep.
And we've been working on it for about a year and a half. Elyse did the actual writing for the nomination. And she spoke here in February. So if you go on the YouTube and want to see Elise's talk, it's really very, very good. And then I had, I tend to have these kind of crazy inspired moments, and I thought, wow, this is interesting. I wonder how many other African Americans are buried in the cemetery, thinking, maybe a couple hundred. I'm up at 533 and counting. And so what we've talked about in terms of what do you do with this information, okay? So we've gathered it. And how did we get it? Some is from the cemetery records. And because I'm a fan of doing really big and kind of crazy things, I actually read the African American newspapers from 1888 to 1920, looking for obituaries, stories about people who had died, because they didn't typically have a paid obituary in one of the major newspapers like the Tribune or the Journal. And so picked up quite a few of those. And I also noticed that what was missing were children. Now, of the 22,000 people buried in the cemetery, more than 10,000 of them, I think closer to 12, were children under the age of 10. So I'm about to go on to my vaccination rant here, okay? You all got it? Vaccinate those kids. And
history is relevant today.
It is very... I can't remember the exact number. It's either 923 or 932 people died from diphtheria. People don't die from that anymore in the United States. It just doesn't happen. And there's one reason for it, and that's vaccination, right? So that became important. But as this crazy thing sort of developed and we have all this information now on 533 people, that's a lot of people and that's a lot of stories. And so Elyse and I talked about it. And she was talking about, well, there's a book. And I'm like, yes, there is. But 533 people, wow. So what we're thinking about, and we'll finalize this at some point, is instead of taking all of those stories, focusing on 10 to 20 families to show how they were interconnected and how they cared for each other at a time when the resources for folks in the Black community were rare. So what you have are the churches coming together, you have families, you have friends, and the connections are absolutely amazing. I mean, we can make a chart that shows how all these people connect to each other through some kind of social organization or neighborliness. And it's a fascinating story because it's very much a story of care and compassion. And that's one of the things we're looking at. How do I go about finding? Well, I've got to tell you, I did have what I thought was a brilliant moment, right? I have a lot of these in the middle of the night where I was trying to figure out. So I had exhausted the Hennepin County death register, and then my next step would have been to look at the microfilm from 1900 to about 1918, and I did not like the idea of doing that, sitting on a stool going through microfilm forever.
Getting a headache.
And getting a headache, things. Getting dizzy, falling off my chair, all of that. But I woke up in the middle of the night and I went, got it. You look for the Black undertakers, right? There it is. It's that, And so I thought, I have kind of a really nice band of volunteers who will pretty much do anything for pizza. So I said, come on in, right? We're going to do this. And so that's what they did, is they wrote down the names of all the people who had been buried by 2 or 3 major Black undertaking companies. And then I also asked them to write down the names of people who were from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana. And what we were looking for there is a Quaker connection, because Quakers established black farming communities in those 3 states. And of course, that was going to pick up a fair number of people who were not black, but it was one good way of finding some who were. And so then having that list, I sat and some were no-brainers. I mean, it was obvious. Others were complicated, and so I had to go look at census records and everything to try and get confirmation of what was happening there. And weirdly, one of the things that just struck me is that multiple coroners, not just one, referred to people on my list as white when they weren't. And I thought, what was that about? First, I was kind of getting paranoid about it and thinking, But I think it was basically a desk job. I think that they never saw the people that they were signing off on. I think it was just, sign it and slide it across your desk. So my paranoia kind of eased a little bit on that, but right. I worry about these things.
It's bad to make assumptions.
Well, I was like, no, I'm pretty sure, if his parents were black and, he was, it was like, come on, let's get real here. So that part's been interesting, and that's taken, I would say I've been working on that for about maybe 5 or 6 months. And again, you pick up information. I probably own the world's largest collection of death certificates. I have a dining room full of them. And one of the things that you look for is who is the informant? Who gave the information on that death certificate? And that's a way of picking up other people, right? It's going, And you check into it. And maybe they don't even have a last name, but it could be like a married daughter or something like that. So checking all of those out as best I can. And you can't always, sometimes you just can't get enough information, but we're going with the 533 at the moment.
So in the interest of saving some trees and not cluttering people's laps, we're going to send out a sheet from, we also had some production issues, but we're going to send out a sheet of resources and whatever. Can you give folks a sense of what we'll share after the program that they can use as guidelines for how to do some research?
I'm the technical issue. I can't make GPS work. And apparently I can't send emails very well either.
These things happen.
These things happen. But what I had put together was a list of recommended readings, books that, and I'll mention a few of them. But the other thing was resources. So if you're interested in doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to try and recruit a few of you, probably in a few minutes, places to go, focusing on free resources for anybody here doing genealogy. Yeah. I mean, there's an amazing website, Latter-day Saints or the Mormons, called FamilySearch.org. It's a freebie, right? And frankly, I find it much easier to navigate than Ancestry.com, which costs you a fair chunk of money. I have Ancestry, but my first go-to is Family Search. The Minnesota Historical Society has online newspapers. That's where I found the African American newspapers. They're all there. The Civil War Sailors and Soldiers website through the National Park Service, Library of Congress, and make a special note of this. I guess I'll go into my rant now. On March 25th, in case you didn't notice, President Trump issued an executive order to bring truth and sanity back into American history. I know. Quit laughing. Yeah, I know. This is how it works. I had that reaction too, but it's frightening because in it he goes after very venerable institutions like the Smithsonian because he doesn't like DEI, as we call it, right? Well, what is our listing on the National Park Service Underground Railroad Network to Freedom but the ultimate in DEI? That's what it's intended for. That's what it does. And it brings people in to our history who have been bypassed. They've been left out. And this is our effort to take those stories back. So, and if you saw what happened as a result of his proclamation. They scrubbed websites. They took out Jackie Robinson. They took out General William Carney, the first black Medal of Honor recipient. They took out the Tuskegee Airmen and the Navajo Code Talkers. And very recently, they tried to take out Harriet Tubman. That lasted one day.
She's indomitable to this day.
So, yeah. So the message here is, be vigilant, keep your eye on things. When something happens that is wrong, yell about it. Make them fix it. Because they have all been restored. But I won't say all. The major ones that have been broadcast about, who knows what else is missing. I'm sure there are others. But keep your eye on that. But things like the Library of Congress, that's libraryofcongress.gov. The Civil War Sailors and Soldiers is National Park Service. The Underground Railroad Network, those are all programs that involve federal money, and those are the kinds of things that this administration is going after in its anti-DEI thing. But the upside, like I say, is people complained, and it fixed. And I was thinking about this. I've been thinking about stories pretty much endlessly lately, and the power of stories, right? And this is an acknowledgement on the part of that administration about how powerful stories are, right? They're not scrubbing them for no good reason, right? They understand the significance of these stories, how important they are to us, how we think of ourselves as individuals, but also how we think of ourselves as a nation, right? And he wants to think of himself as a very particular kind of nation, and the rest of us are saying, no, that's not the way this works. So keep an eye on that. And I wonder, how did I digress to that?
You didn't digress.
I knew I was going to rant about it at some point.
You progressed, because the second community engagement that we were going to talk about was present-day community. And you are creating community with this work. You're getting people sucked in, involved, and what have you. So talk a little bit about how just everyday people are resonating with the stories that you're uncovering.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Actually, I always tease people and say I'm chair of a group called Friends of the Cemetery, but we're a heck of a lot more fun than we sound like we would be, right? You got to admit that does not sound like a fun group. But in fact, we are very fun. It's been probably 10, 12 years now, but we had a rock concert in the cemetery that had 1,500 people with Jeremy Messersmith. Bless his heart. Yay, Jeremy. Yeah. We've shown movies. We do all kinds of things. We work with Boy Scouts. We're a big Eagle Scouts. Love us. We're a great place for Eagle Scouts to do their project. Last summer, we had the Wounded Warriors chapter come in and clean markers with Rethos. Had a training session, and it was amazing. It was just such an amazing good time, and they were all asking, can we come back and do this again? And I said, you bet, and if you stay longer, I'll cook you a hot dog, right? We do that. There's a school across the street from the cemetery, with Hennepin County School, that has a special needs program for, if you're under 40, I think you're a kid, but they're young adults, 18 to 25, who have special needs. And every year they come in and we designate certain markers where they can take rubbings. And then we have these wild conversations about whether or not zombies are real. They're not, just in case you were wondering. Veterans groups, of course, because we do Memorial Day. I'm just trying to think. We engage with a lot of different people. And I've been writing for the Alley newspaper. Yay, Alley newspaper. 50th anniversary year for them. And I've been writing for them since, I believe it's 2003, a monthly column. I just did one this morning at 7 o'clock. And it's a rant about, an executive order that was issued fairly recently. Civic groups, Daughters of Union Veterans, Daughters of 1812. I mean, just amazing groups of people. And I found out that I asked somebody, I get calls from people, will I come out and speak? Right? And so I finally said, how did you get my name? Right? And they said, oh, your name is on a list. And I went, oh.
What kind of a list?
Yeah, I hope it's a good list. But that's now caused me to get lost in Coon Rapids, and, I get lost a lot trying to find the suburbs. But those are the kinds of things that we do, and that was really the intent. One of our goals is, as I'm getting rather long in the tooth, to engage younger people. And boy, I'll tell you, Jeremy Messersmith did that for us, as did movies. You know, you get people in. At the time, we had kind of an old-fashioned smartphone history hunt where we had these posters, and you could scan it, and it would tell you who was downstairs. And then for folks who didn't have a smartphone, we had one called Face to Face, where we would put the faces of people, and they could go around, and we had a handout that said, this is who it is. What we're hoping to do, okay, three big upcoming events. May 26th is Memorial Day, 10 o'clock, our traditional service, and it's lovely. Our speaker is a woman named Sammy Hollander. She is a veteran and from American Post 1. We're very excited about her. And along with her, we get the Seward Community Band, which if you haven't heard them, they're great. We have Junior ROTC from the Transition Charter School. Of course, we have vets. Boy Scouts, you name it, we got them. We have to call the 3rd Precinct because when you do a 21-gun salute, you don't want the cops shooting back at you. You know, things like that. Details you have to kind of think about. And then our big one and most exciting, June 7th at 1 o'clock, is going to be the dedication of the Underground Railroad Network to freedom. So no matter what happens with the Park Service, it's too late because I already have the plaque.
You have the plaque.
I got it.
We expect a Park Service rep to be there, but if they don't show, we're going ahead.
Nothing's stopping this one.
Right.
It's absolutely, I would say, well, two things, they're connected. This is such an amazing honor for us. It's really quite extraordinary. Working with Elyse has been wonderful. One of the things that I was really interested in is finding a woman, right? It's tricky enough to document black folks who were formerly enslaved and became part of the Underground Railroad, but many of them have a connection to the military. And if you're connected to the military, you got a heap of paper somewhere, right? So, but for a woman, this is tricky. We found one, and her name is Hester Patterson. And what I found, probably my research bonanza in 25 years at the Minnesota Historical Society, I found a memoir. And what happened is she fled from a cotton plantation in Mississippi, met up with the 4th Minnesota Volunteer Infantry, and in particular the surgeon. And he's the one who got her on her way to Minneapolis. And she moved into their household as a cook. His son, when he was 8 years old, when Hester moved in, and as an adult, he wrote a memoir, and he's got about 3 or 4 pages talking about her. And I found that, and it was like, I went running out to the lobby to go, Elyse, you aren't going to believe what I just found. This is amazing. So there's that. And then what I did, I'm sort of into my history as resistance mode. Hester died 150 years ago, and she's been in an unmarked grave all that time. Well, we fixed it. I just ordered her a headstone, and that will be in place by June 7th. So these are the kinds of things, that sort of make it all worthwhile, to think about what her life was like and how brave, what her courage, It's an amazing story. It's an absolutely amazing story. And we're going to keep telling them because I got the plaque.
That's awesome.
You'll have to peel that from my cold. That's not, no, I got it. It's mine.
It's just really cool.
Yeah.
Thinking of other connections from the folks in the cemetery to folks today, talk about John Cheatham a little bit, and which came first, you doing research and then renaming a street, or back and forth?
Yeah.
Talk about that community interplay of...
That's one of the really fun things. I was talking to 6 classes of middle school students, which is kind of a raucous group to be dealing with. But we were talking about John Cheatham, and what I wanted them to understand that history is...
We should tell people who John Cheatham is in case they don't know.
We're going to get
you're
there.
Getting there, okay.
But what I was trying to do is to get the kids to understand that history is not a static thing, right? That it's just not a bunch of names and dates. John Cheatham was Minneapolis' first black firefighter. And he is buried in the cemetery. And as I found out later, 9 of his relatives are too. Many of them with different names, like a daughter or a sister who were married and they were not Cheathams. But I was contacted by Judge LeJune Lang, who has done some amazing work. And she is the one who really moved the city to change the name of a street from Dite Avenue. You do not want to go with Dite because he was a eugenics man, a fan of Hitler. There was all manner of bad things about that guy. And so in 2021, they changed the street name from Dite to Cheatham Avenue. And the thing that was beautiful about it, I don't know if you've ever seen the black firefighters, what their dress uniforms are, but they're gorgeous. And so here there were probably 20 firefighters who came in their dress uniforms, and the fire chief, who is black, is the one who got to do the unveiling. It was a very, very moving moment. It was just lovely. So that's the kind of thing, that you can correct things, oversights or outright insults in some cases of things that have gone wrong in the past, and that these are healing. While some people say this is divisive, there's nothing divisive about this. It's only shameful if you don't go back and try to fix something that was wrong to begin with. So it's a trip.
Yeah.
It's really fun to go to those events, let me tell you. Yeah.
So I think it's remarkable what you've been doing over the years to connect quote unquote regular people to this. People didn't know that they were into cemeteries. They didn't know they were into history, but you're finding ways to pull them in. Talk about the unique community that is the cemetery community, like the network of cemetery aficionados and...
Oh, yeah. Cemetery people are kind of crazy, right? So, now, how many of you have cemetery photographs in your vacation pictures, right? Yeah.
There we go. See, these are our people.
Yeah. Mine are almost pretty much nothing but. You want to see the cemetery in New Salem, North Dakota? I got you covered. And that's kind of what happens. I mean, there are people who are just interested in cemeteries generally. And I find it fascinating that there is something that attracts us to these stories. And kids get it too. I've had 5-year-olds where on Memorial Day, I would buy extra flowers and I would give them to a child and say, go find somebody and, put them on their grave. And they're walking around and they're doing the math, trying to figure out, so it's as soon as 5. So it's a very interesting group. People have interests, different types of interests. Some people like cemeteries as landscapes, right? You've got a book, I think, Jim Rogers' Northern Orchards, and I know Jim. I haven't seen him for a while, but he's very interested in cemeteries as landscapes. Whereas me, I'm interested in who's downstairs. And so there are just different ways to think about this. But some people just like to come in. We have people who come in and will sit under a tree with a lunch or a sketchbook, just kind of hang out. Mm-hmm. And there's no better place. The beauty of our cemetery, I think, is it's kind of like not over touristy.
That's true.
It's still, people go, oh, I've always been meaning to stop in there. But you're always on your way to somewhere else, right, when you think about it. But when they do take the time, people like to walk around, take photographs, just look, right? So it is. There's even a word for it, although it's escaping me at the moment. And of course, it ends in ophiles, right? People who love cemeteries.
Oh.
But yeah, there is a fancy word for it. You know it? You know it?
No. I was going to ask you a quick question. Could you tell us a little history of the cemetery?
Oh, sure. The first burial was in 1853, although legally they say it was platted in 1858. And the reason it belonged to the Lehman family, so it's most often referred to as Lehman's Cemetery. And that was their family name. It was not like a soldier, a layman. That was their name, Martin and Elizabeth. And they were Baptists. They belonged to the First Baptist Church of Minneapolis, although Alyssa and I figured out, is that first with a capital F or just first with a little f? I'm not sure. But they were also, the First Baptist Church was deeply involved in the anti-slavery movement. And this, it was fairly slow growth because Minneapolis was small. Up until about the mid-1870s, when all of a sudden we had this kind of flood of Scandinavians who arrived. And so it's like to tell people of our 22,000 folks, 1,035 of them are named Johnson. Yeah, thank you. 823 Andersons, got a few of those too. And then by the time you're through with the Olson, Peterson, Larson, you pretty much got it covered. And so it was the first municipal cemetery, and it is the oldest existing cemetery in Minneapolis. It was the first freestanding cemetery listed on the National Register of Historic Sites in 2002. And that had to do with its ties to the anti-slavery movement, immigration. If you walk around and start looking at the stones, you can pretty much figure out where people came from and when. And also some of the physical structures. There's a beautiful little caretaker's cottage that dates to 1871. And I don't know of an older stone building in South Minneapolis than that one. Flagpoles, one of my favorites. We have this big boulder with a plaque on it. We call it the Mother's Rock, that has this kind of sentimental quote from Abraham Lincoln: "Everything I am or ever hope to be, I owe to my angel mother." Gotta love that guy, right? So, it's things like that we have, a Grand Army of the Republic plot. So physical structures and so on. So the cemetery was going along. It was privately owned. Back in the day, they had never heard of the notion of paying it forward, right? Now today, when you buy a cemetery plot, you pay a lot for it. You're paying for perpetual care. That's the word I was looking for. But they didn't have that then. And so families were more or less responsible for cleaning up, for maybe kicking in $1 or $2 for a caretaker, but that was it. And then it was filled up. There were at one time 27,000 people there. And then by the third generation of the Lehman family, they wanted to clear the land for development. And so the Minneapolis City Council passed an ordinance that closed the cemetery to future burials. Now, a certain family member misrepresented that and said it was condemned. If it had been condemned, they would have had to remove people. But it wasn't condemned, it was merely closed. But it remained closed. Well, so then there was this kind of land rush where 5,000 people were taken out. And where did they go? The majority went to Crystal Lake, quite a few to Lakewood, Canada, California, wherever the families landed. We have drawers of correspondence about, and some of them are absolutely heartbreaking, which is, Papa hurt his back, we don't have any money, what will happen to my baby, right? You cry a lot when you do this kind of research because they're sad. But then in the 1920s, there was a letter to the editor in the Minneapolis Journal called Let Them Rest Undisturbed. And a group like ours, but it was called the Minneapolis Cemetery Protective Association, MCPA, was formed, and they lobbied politicians to get the cemetery protected. A bonding bill, they passed a bonding bill, and at that point the city of Minneapolis took over maintenance of the cemetery. And it's a very curious ownership arrangement because the city owns the 5,000 empty graves, the flagpole, the building, but the families retained ownership of the graves. And that may seem like a what's the difference kind of thing, because obviously the caretaker mows everybody's grave, whether it's empty or not. But it is an issue because of placing markers. The city passed an ordinance before I was on the Heritage Preservation with design guidelines that said you could only have certain types of markers. Well, I don't know who's supposed to enforce that.
The Preservation Commission, presumably, but...
Well, you know, so I've been engaged having a conversation with some staff just this week about that. I said, certainly not the caretaker, because we've had probably 4 caretakers since then. And I said, don't look at me, because I'm not doing it. So I said, what do we do? Call the 3rd precinct and say, hey, get over here?
Right.
Yeah, it's like, so it was just one of these kind of crazy things. And also kind of silly, because people tend to buy, not exclusively, but tend to buy flat markers, because markers are not cheap, right? If you bought one lately, I can tell you, a 2-foot by 1-foot marker is going to cost you about $1,200. So if a family is that committed to honoring their people, I don't care what they do. I think it's...
And even though the cemetery's closed, there is an out clause. You had
There is.
Your most recent burial is...
One of our board members.
A couple years ago.
But it's okay. He was okay with it. He wanted that.
That's right. But what's the how tight does your genealogy need to be to say you're a descendant of somebody from the cemetery?
Pretty tight.
Okay.
What happened is in 1935, the widow of one of our Civil War veterans passed away. Her husband had died 50 years earlier. She had been waiting 50 years to be buried next to him. And so her family took it to the Minneapolis City Council, and they came up with a policy that exceptions would be made, but you had to own a plot already, which they stopped selling in 1918. You had to have a family member already buried there, and it had to be approved by the Minneapolis City Council. That changed, and they dropped the approved by the Minneapolis City Council part a few years later. But she was the first, and since then there have been about 85 burials. Most recently, 2021, he's up there in the exhibit, Jack Furman, who was on our board. Jack was 92 when he passed. He was a great deal of fun. If you came to one of our movies and you bought chips or pop or Snickers, Jack is the one who sold them to you. And when I went to his memorial service and I was talking to his wife, Nancy, I said, so sorry about Jack. And she said, oh, but you're going to love this. And I said, what? She said, he wants to be buried there. Whoa. And so it was a fascinating process. Jack, Pat Rat that he was, had the deed from 1897. His grandparents are buried there, as were 2 of their children. And everybody at the city wanted to help. But whose job is this, right? Everybody's going, I don't know, can I bury people? So we went through a bunch of crazy maneuvers. I finally found a newspaper article from the previous last burial, which was in 1888, and I sent it off to Mike Kennedy, who at that time was head of the street department, which oddly oversees the cemetery. And I said, well, pal, this one just landed on your desk. And he's like, oh, thanks.
Poor Mike.
Yeah. I just saw him a couple of weeks ago, and he's going, oh, yeah.
It's more interesting than snow emergencies. If any of you live in Minneapolis...
potholes, who cares?
Mike Kennedy is the voice behind, we are now having a snow emergency. So.
Yeah, he's the one who gets to call him,
Yeah.
He and I had a lot of funny business over the years. I mean, just kind of crazy stuff that we were dealing with. And finally, it worked its way through the system. I got help from Alondra Cano, was our city council member, and her policy aide, Graham Faulkner, did horrendous amounts of research to make this go, and the city attorney finally signed off on it. So I put together a ring binder for Nancy, Jack's widow, because she wants to be buried there, and there is room for her. Mm-hmm. And I said, you're going to outlive me. So give this to your daughters, because when this comes up again, nobody's going to remember how to do it.
Right.
So it was, but see, those are the kinds of fun things where you solve these problems, and it's like, wow, you know, look at that. So 2021 was kind of a banner year because we got a street sign changed and we buried Jack Furman. So,
Yeah, that's great.
but look at Jack upstairs. His picture is in the loop.
So I promised to bring you all into this conversation too. So I'm going to get up with the roving mic and let people ask questions, or if you've got comments or stories you want to share.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's start back here. Pass that down.
I'm wondering whether or not one of the walks the history walks that you're doing this year will be at the cemetery.
Say that again.
Walking tours.
Yes.
Yeah, we were going to touch on that at the end. I think this turned off somehow. Okay, so there we are. Question is, are we doing walking tours this summer? And talk about the ones that you normally do, and then I'll talk about we're scheming for some more.
Yes. I probably do 6 to 8 walking tours a year. There's one coming up May 15th through Minneapolis Public Schools, 55 Alive. So this is geared for me because I walk very slowly these days. And so that's basically for seniors. I'm just trying to remember because there's one through the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute that I had forgotten. This one is new this year. A woman that I know is doing a class, and if you look at Olli, O-L-L-I, you'll see it listed there. I will do another walking tour for Minneapolis Public Ed in October. I do Murder and Mayhem. I know. I told you I was a fun person. In September every year, that one comes up.
That's through Preserve Minneapolis, is that right?
That's through Preserve Minneapolis. So they're the ones who organize those things. But I can also tell you that we are committed. One of the principles of Friends of the Cemetery, although some of those folks are going to charge because they have costs in advertising and staffing and so forth, we will not deny anybody history for lack of money. That's just, we don't do that. So we will do that. On Memorial Day, the service is at 10 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, we do a seated talk. And it's seated because the cemetery is theoretically accessible. I can tell you, not so much. It's flat, but it's lumpy flat, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are a lot of people who can't navigate that distance. And so we started this years ago when I had to actually pay for chairs. I had to rent them. Now I have chairs. The city gave me a bunch. But we still kind of try to hold to that format so that we can accommodate people who really want to know about the cemetery but aren't up for woofing around. So.
Yeah. So, and Sue and I have just started talking about, is there something in conjunction with this exhibit that we might have a new kind of walking tour? There's no reason for the museum to try to replicate what Sue's already doing, but we're going to brainstorm in the next few weeks to see if there's a new theme or a new something. Very quickly, while I look for the next question, once you open a Memorial Day, what are the hours or ways to access the cemetery?
Actually, it should be opening on April 15th, which is next Tuesday?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing probably Kevin's hours, he may even be there Monday because it's a weird work week. The caretaker is on staff from Wednesday through Sunday. His weekend is Monday, Tuesday, because the majority of visitors come in on weekends. So that's when it makes sense to have the most staff. The hours are, they say 8 to 4, but realistically they're 8:30 to 3:30 because he has to pick up a truck and drop off a truck and do all that kind of stuff. So between those hours, you can always call the cemetery's phone, which is actually in the yellow pages I saw the other day.
There are still yellow pages? Okay.
I know, I'm sitting here looking at that case getting creeped out by the fact that the doll I played with when I was a kid is now an antique on display, mm-hmm. right? So, but also on the answering machine, they have my phone number. And if we mail you that handout, which I forgot to send John, it has my contact information, both my email and my phone number, and feel free to contact me. just, not at 11 o'clock at night or 5 in the morning, but for the most part, sure, shoot me an email and let me know what you want, what you need.
Sue's 5 a.m. Slots are taken by the local TV. We've been doing various media stuff for this exhibit. We
were in the cemetery like at 5:30 in the morning, and I'm thinking, who the heck watches TV at 5:30 in the morning?
Find out about your friends when you do a 5:30
Well,
TV
apparently
segment.
my sister-in-law and my neighbor across the alley did, because by the time I got home, I was getting text messages going, "Hey, just saw you on TV." And I'm like,
so who else? Here you go.
My first question is probably is more relevant to this topic, and that is any connections that you've come up with relative to indigenous people here. And secondly, I need to know about the deer.
Yes.
that darn fern. Oh, blast her hide. Yeah. Indigenous people, this is interesting because for many years we know that Mary Prescott, she was the wife of Philander Prescott, the fur trader, is buried there. And our thinking was she was the only full-blooded Native American there. And their son, who of course is biracial, Lawrence Tolliver Prescott, Civil War vet, no less, is buried there. And a couple of their grandchildren who would be like 1/4. But in the process of identifying African Americans, I found 2 biracial marriages where the husband was black and the wife was Native American. So there's a woman named Ruth Hawthorne who is buried there, and she is, according, I have a Native friend, I showed her a picture of this woman and she went, she's Ho Chunk. How could you tell that? And she said, I can just tell. And then there's another family where the mother is not buried there, but she and her husband lost 5 children. So there are 5 biracial children who had a Native mom. And so we're kind of uncovering these as we go. This is one of the things where this is never done. And there's also a baby who, it's hard to say, but the baby's last name was Gridiron and was born on a reservation in Oklahoma. And so, we have to confirm exactly what's going on there. And maybe we won't be able to. But those are the kinds of interesting things that we've been uncovering. So it's more than one, but of course most Native Americans had a very different cultural practice for death and mourning than sort of what we think of associate more with Judeo-Christian. So, but we're looking for them. Oh, the deer. Oh, darn it. Okay, now Fern is a secret, you guys. Got it? Fern is a secret. Fern is the matriarch deer in our cemetery. I love her so much. I cannot tell you. She's been there about 7 or 8 years now. Very healthy, extremely healthy. And very fertile, unfortunately. Because we started off, and when Fern showed up, she was all by herself. She was a yearling, and she had kind of a hitch in her walk. So as near as we could tell, she came up the greenway and hopped the fence, because deer can jump like a son of a gun, and that she just had gotten left behind, that she couldn't keep up. Well, the street department staff loved her and used to go in and pull down the crab apples off the trees for her. And Fern became she's not tame, but she's not afraid of people either. I mean, she doesn't come when we call her name, unless you're waving a bag of grapes at her, in which case, pretty good chance she'll come over. And so she was by herself for a couple of years and spent her time stalking people on Lake Street. They'd walk down the street and they'd stop and she'd stop on the other side of the fence, and they'd start and she'd start. And then she'd get down to the bus stop and she'd pick up somebody who was going back the other way and would do this same kind of creeping along thing. So then we had another deer named Lily who unfortunately, this is why we try to keep the deer under wraps. Someone got in and harassed a deer, and we lost Lily. One of the deer died, and one of the yearlings, Lily and one of the yearlings never came back. But then another deer entered, and her name was Franny until she turned out to be Frankie. Sprouted antlers on us, going, what are those bumps on her head? It's like, no. So the first batch of babies, Fern and Lily each had 2. One of Lily's died, and Lily did not have much maternal instinct, so Fern wound up nursing all 3. She did all 3. And then last year, as our Memorial Day surprise, dear old Fern popped out 3, just like a Pez dispenser. We got on Memorial Day. I'm going, no. We're busy. Go away. But they are very, very healthy. And the fact that Fern is still that fertile at her age is, I used to get all these frantic emails. Oh, they're trapped. Oh, they're starving. Trust me. There's no deer in Minnesota that has eaten more mangoes and strawberries than Fern. Okay, so.
All right. We have another question over here.
Thank you for telling us all about the deer, because that was going to be a question as well.
But okay, so it's all a secret, guys. Got this? Okay, you can keep a secret.
So I wanted to just say I have loved your stories through the alley for years. I always picking them up and sharing them with others. So
thank you.
For that. I was just thinking about whether or not you might do some stories for the Spokesman Recorder on some of what you're finding, because that's one of the oldest black journals too. So
there was a couple years ago. There was a reporter. Her name was Janika, and she and I met a couple times. And she did one that was about John Cheatham, and she was interested in contraband, right? Yeah. And she moved to Las Vegas, and I wanted to track her down because I wanted to let her know about Hester Patterson. And so I will make an effort to do that. It's kind of a tricky thing. I mean, one of the things is whose story is it to tell?
Sure.
Right? And at one time I was thinking, I'll write something about Mary Prescott. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, is this really my story to tell? And I've since met one of her descendants, and I went, hey, this is your story to tell, right? So it's a good question, but it's kind of a sensitive issue, and it's something I give a lot of thought to, is who's the appropriate person to be telling and sharing these stories? Right. I mean, clearly I'm up to it here, but is it mine to tell? Right. And that's a question.
And then the other thing I was going to just ask is, how do we keep up with all of the cool stuff that you're doing? Like, if we become a friend of the cemetery, do we get notices about what you're doing? Or, I mean, I pop around to the preservation, whatever, but and I'm like, oh darn, I missed, so is there a way to kind of...
I am definitely old school. I have never tweeted, TikToked, or...
No, I don't actually do that either, so I was more just wondering...
We do have a Facebook page, and the alley is one. At some point here, John and I had talked about sort of, there's the community in the past, there's a community at present, but going forward, given my age and limitations, sort of where do I want to see this going? And that would be one of the things that would be remarkably useful, would be to have somebody help us figure out how to get that information out into the world. For Memorial Day, I contact all the usual suspects, the Star Tribune, the nextdoor.com, all of those, and try to get them, or the local newspaper, Southside Pride. But some events are kind of spur of the moment, and like, I can't even remember now. Did I mention jazz and poetry? Oh, okay. June 21st at 2 o'clock, there will be jazz and poetry. It's the 5th annual. It's usually a fairly small gathering, 50 to 75 people. And so there are some local musicians who play, but then Last year's was particularly fun. The whole thing is coordinated by a friend of mine, Pastor Patrick, who was the pastor at...
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're a Lutheran in South Minneapolis, you probably know this guy. And he taught a writing class called Writing Your Ancestors. And many of these people who wrote were newbies. They'd never written before. But they came and they read their work. And it was just an amazing good time. And all we do is put out chairs. It's cookies and lemonade, right? Free, fun, 2 o'clock on June 21st. So we're kind of, that's what we do well. Our small, extravaganzas make me very nervous. It's like planning these kinds of things, the logistics of them. And of course, one of the dangers of doing stuff in a cemetery is weather, right? We don't control that. So that gets to be a trick. But what I was also thinking, I was telling John, we were talking about what exactly is Friends of the Cemetery? Because we're kind of it's kind of like defining community, right? It's like, we're a group of, I don't know what, a mailing list, the people who like us on Facebook. Like I said, I have a small core, about 6 people of volunteers. But as I need to think about a
Succession plan.
Thanks. I'm not seceding. I'm needing someone to...
You're succeeding.
Yeah. I have trouble with those words, I think that's an age thing, too, where my vocabulary is going... I used to be able to spell really well until spell check. But some of the opportunities that we need help with or would like help with, gardening. We don't have a lot of garden in that cemetery, but the caretaker is not a gardener, right? He doesn't have time, and there are just a few beds around the caretaker's cottage. There are a couple beds by the Cedar Avenue gates that could stand some tending, and the things to take into account are, sort of drought-resistant, low-maintenance, deer-proof. In other words, do not plant hosta ever.
Fern likes the hosta.
Oh, I came in, I didn't know that about deer. And when it was just fern, I walked in and I walked up to the caretaker and I said, "Who weed whipped my hosta?" And he said, "Fern." And he said, "Those are like potato chips for deer. They're just like, yay, She escaped one day, somebody harassed her, cut a hole in the fence, chased her over to the Y across the street. Well, they're hostas and hydrangeas. Everybody's freaking out, and there's old Fern munching away, and I was like, oh my gosh. So
But we digress. You need some gardening help.
We need some gardening. But keep in mind, Fern is an issue on that one. Marker cleaning, which if you've never done it, is kind of fun. It's a very zen activity where there's a special soap you use called D2. And then you get a toothbrush or other kind of brush, and you just sit there and... That's what we were doing with the Wounded Warriors. And it's really remarkable what a difference it can make on some of those markers. The caretaker always loves help with picking up trash along the fence line. People cannot mow or do weed whipping. I think it's a liability issue, but it's also a union labor issue. So cleaning up is okay, but people say, "Oh, bring in my lawnmower." Ixnay, city would not go with that one. If any of you want to help with research and or writing, you want to write an Alley article? Think about this. There are any number of topics. One of the things in looking through these African American papers, people who do history have a tendency to fall down rabbit holes, right? Where you're looking for one thing and then the next thing you're off on some other, how did I get here? Just like, what? And so I wanted to get through making that list. So what I did is I made a list of really interesting things that need to be looked up. For example, I found a gentleman whose occupation was comedian. Hello. In the early 1900s. Well, it turns out the Southern Theater up on Seven Corners, it was white-owned, but they hired black entertainers and they very much catered to black audiences. So there's a story there that needs some looking into, right? I mean, another one was something called the Equal Rights Barber Shop in 1889. Think of that. 1889 said they named their business the Equal Rights Barber Shop. That's a story, right? Wow. So I have pages of these things, and those are just examples from the Black community. There are people, for example, who might be interested in Bohemian Flats, or people who might be interested in a particular health issue, women's health, women who died in childbirth, right? Railroad accidents, of which we have many, flour mill accidents, those kinds of things. Even car accidents, because I believe we have the first victim of a car accident buried in the cemetery, because there weren't a lot of cars when the cemetery was active. So, I mean, there are about 1 million different topics, and if any of you are interested in working on something, let me know.
So
right?
Say again how people can contact you or get on the mailing list.
Well, if I could do email, you would have had that information
so
today.
we'll send that out. So
they'll
people
send
can
it
follow.
out, but if you want my email, it's easy enough. It's S, like in Susan, hello, Hunter Weir, all smushed together, S Hunter Weir, @gmail.com. And if you call the cemetery number, it's 7298484, who cares? But my cell phone number is listed on their answering machine, so you can pick that up. But it is on the handout that I did for you and totally
We'll
forgot
get it
to
out.
send to John.
We'll get it out.
So yeah, feel free. And if any of you have family members, for sure, I want to hear from you, because our exhibit upstairs is very much based on information that we have gotten from family members. And we do research for family members. We don't, I'm not a genealogist. I am not a professional genealogist. But if somebody calls and says, I'm looking for such and so, I have a ton of information about a lot of people. And we will share anything and everything that we have for free with people. That's just what we do. That's what we're about.
Yes.
Could you repeat her Gmail?
shunterweir@gmail.com.
So it's SHUNTERWEIR.
Thank you.
It's weird, like in weird, not wire.
So we've reached an hour. Goes fast. Do you have some more? Okay.
I just have a couple.
Yeah.
We would like I have visions, right, of other programming we could do. I thought it would be fun to have a cemetery book club.
Oh, gosh.
Okay, so if any of you are interested in that, I thought it would be nice to have a standard office hours where someone is in the office and can help family who come in locate graves. We know where everybody is. We have maps as to where all the markers are. But, it's it's an adventure of finding graves. So, and those are the kinds of things where we can share information, teach people how to do that. And any other events that people think are interesting. We've had puppet shows, Heart of the Beast, and in a couple of cases I've just contracted with puppet artists. Say, I've got $300, what can you give me? We're cheap, right? We do not do a lot of fundraising. That's not our thing. So,
all right. So please do follow up. I saw a lot of hands for cemetery interest. So the Friends of Pioneer and Soldiers could use some help to keep the energy up. Just another few housekeeping and encouragement things. If you haven't seen the exhibit yet, it's upstairs. Worth a look. You can see who John Cheatham looks like. You can get some of the backstories of the folks there. Wanted to always do a shout out in events like this to those of you who are members of the museum. Thank you so much. Your support really makes this place go. And for those of you who haven't become members yet, our current membership program is a gift of any amount makes you a member of the museum, which will give you discounts in the store, discounts on our walking tours when we put those together. We've got a whole slate of summer walking tours. So if you haven't had a chance to donate to Hennepin History Museum, we can take care of you at the front desk. And we've talked a lot about the handout. if you happen to slide in whatever way, shape, or form this afternoon and aren't signed up, make sure we get your email at the front desk so we can get you that information that Sue's got.
Yep.
So we're here for a little bit. We're not chasing anybody out. We're open till 5. So more chance for chat and stories and what have you. And thank you again for coming, and have a good afternoon. Thank you, Sue.
Huh?
Thank you.